Even before the contents of the 2014 budget are spilled, a slew of new taxes have been added to the worsening headache of Ghana's private sector. The enabling environment is fast becoming the hangman's noose for those who create the wealth of this country. What should Tekwe say on Tuesday to give a push-up to Ghana's entrepreneurs instead of adding more weight to pull them down from the still stationary economic trotro? My guests tonight live the woes and challenges of Ghana's private sector and have to figure out how to square the circle of their tools being taken away before they can add value and jobs to our economy. Mr. Ernest Oku is the Managing Director of Aluworks Limited. Mr. Abraham Kumson is the Secretary General of the Ghana Federation of Labour. But before we get stuck into our conversation, let's sift the wheat from the chaff on how to enable our private sector to become the engine of Ghana's economic growth.
For more than 30 years or more, all governments of Ghana, of all shapes, have spouted the mantra of the private sector playing the pivotal role in the economic development and prosperity of the country. The phrase, "the private sector is the engine of growth," has become one of the set pieces of speeches given by Ghanaian leaders. Mr. Speaker, as well as the stock in trade commitment that sits at the heart of the annual budget statement, all governments have pledged to provide the private sector with incentives to spearhead the economic growth, generate employment, and increase income. This would be achieved through the creation of an enabling environment that would improve the competitiveness of Ghana's private sector to increase their presence and share in national, regional, and global markets.
As a country, the focus going forward is on making sure that we create enough confidence in Ghana for people to look beyond the very obvious attractive investment areas and to look at the services sector, as well as looking at developing other businesses that provide the support to these larger sectors. Because here we have the oil and gas industry, which is largely extractive and is offshore. And so to that extent, it's not a major job creator in and of itself. But there's the oil services sector that could either go to companies that are not Ghanaian, or that we can attract companies that are not Ghanaian to develop in Ghana and develop our local talent and our local skills as well, and to create that participation that will allow Ghanaians to feel that they're not just benefiting from this resource in terms of revenue, but they're also benefiting from this resource in terms of job creation.
Unfortunately, there is and has always been a yawning gap between the promise of succeeding governments to fuel the private sector to drive the engine of Ghana's growth and the reality of the measures that are actually put in place. Instead of measures that add synergy to the natural get-up-and-go attitude and enthusiasm of our local entrepreneurs, successive governments have promoted measures that are inimical to the interests of Ghana's private sector. Far greater attention and significance is given to the successful attraction of foreign direct investment than to the achievement of the mere paper talk of pushing local content. Rather, governments have come to see the private sector as the sitting duck ready to be slaughtered to provide revenue to feed the growing expenditures of a bloated public sector. The accumulative impact of the squeeze on Ghana's private sector have been seen in the shrinking size of Ghana's manufacturing and other indigenous businesses, resulting in the severe reduction of local industry and services as a proportion of the national wealth, and an increasing influx of imported goods and foreign business operators into our lives. Ghana's private sector has made its concerns about all the policies and actions that are choking the supposedly golden goose for Ghana's economic wealth to a slow, painful, and inexorable strangulation.
It limited our ability to produce at highest levels. But because of national needs, private sector accommodated, even though it reduced our internally generated funding. The importance is recognition of the difficulty and deficiencies at this time.
That's right.
Power outages, deficiency in utility deliveries, water and others. High cost of money. When others are borrowing at 3%, we are 30%. Lack of capacity. So these are items that government itself recognizes. Why do they call us a partner when there's no consultation as to raising, revenue, and it's becoming a kind of a bullet pulpit where government says, okay, this is what we need, this is what we're going to do. The profit margins of private sector is going to be reduced to a position where we almost just breaking even. And when we start just to break even, there's no opportunity for government to tax any longer. What are we going to do? Now we take plate in hand and shop around for more credit.
As we await the Honorable Setekpe's set piece on Tuesday, Ghana's private sector will be hoping that if the government cannot add more fuel to the engine of growth, it should not put another gallon to siphon off the little diesel left in the engine.
Welcome back. My guests tonight, as I said, are two people from either side of the private sector. And it's Kwesi Oko, as I said, is the managing director of Aluworks, which sits at the heart of the aluminium industry. It's the intermediary provider of the raw materials that feeds the end products in the aluminium industry. And he's very well versed in the economic development of Ghana, having worked most of his life in the private sector and now trying to work for Ghana's push forward. My other guest is Abraham Kumsin. You may ask why the Federation of Labour. I believe the importance of labor and their reason for being there is to protect the jobs and well-being of their members. So when the private sector is not functioning, their members also do suffer. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start off our discussion by what is the reality behind the enabling environment to make the private sector the engine of growth. You've all been in industry. You've seen successive governments parrot this mantle. Let's get some beef. Let's start off with you, Ernest. You've been in the private sector virtually all your life. What can you tell us are the realities of what constitutes the enabling environment in nearly 40 years of being in Ghana's private sector? What can you say these are the good things that help the private sector?
I think we have to understand, first of all, that the phrase that you've just used, that the private sector is the engine of growth, is only a cliche. It never really happens in real life in this country. In this country, it is a phrase that is bandied about for effect. But really, does the private sector really matter to governments in this country? It doesn't seem like that to us in the private sector. The structure of our country's economy is changing every year and every year. Where we sit now, we find that the public sector, which is less than 10% of the population of this country, is taking away 70% and more of the government's revenue. If you look at that and say that the 90% and more of this country now have to rely on the few entrepreneurs and people in the private sector for their subsistence, it puts the picture in perspective. Very clearly, the public sector is not doing its bit if it is taking so much of our revenue and leaving the wherewithal that we need for the growth of this country to the private sector.
Are there one or two measures that you can say these are incentives for? Do you get any tax breaks or anything of that sort?
I have to think very hard to find examples of measures that the government have put in place, really, apart from talk, which really helps the private sector. Because every day we get new taxes, we get new administrative controls. 2 days ago, we've had a new shock of the VAT. What that does is to make the disposable income of the final consumer even smaller. We are crying about lack of demand, and we've actually reduced the real economic demand. What are we doing? I hesitate to find what has been given to us as an incentive, except for hardships.
Abraham, you represent labor. Is there anything that you can think of by way of, let's say, training or other things which you can say makes your membership better equipped to play a better role in Ghana's industry?
Training, we don't.
I mean, just any kind of incentive that are
for
giving.
Training, we think about job security.
That's right.
Training, if you are trained and you lose your job, where are you going to apply that knowledge?
Training. Yeah.
So I think that what is important is for government, because
what I was driving at was you take something like JIDA, which is meant to be providing training.
Yeah, okay.
How does that relate to, let's say, the demands of Ghana's industry? And are you even involved in that kind of process?
No,
because I really want us to nail this issue of enabling environment, so that I don't want anyone to come and say that, oh, but you didn't say these are the incentives. So I want us to start off by saying, what have successive governments done in terms of enabling the industrial environment from the perspective of labor?
I think as for workers, we depend on employers. If there is no job, I mean, we are not employed. So we partner employers or investors to sort of sustain their businesses so we can also remain in employment. So if they complain like this, we know already that they are really, under pressure. The industry is stressed. And so there's a need for government, not NDC, MPP, governments that take charge of this, the administration of this country, should pay attention to the private sector. Otherwise, they cannot compete. I don't know how Alwex is faring now, but I think that they are seriously under pressure. And the employees that they used to have, I don't think that they have these numbers now. And so the situation applies to all, manufacturing industries in this country. And I think that government will have to pay attention to it. And I think this program is timely. Maybe it is too late to influence what is going to be read, what is going to be read on Tuesday. But I think that they can make last minute, amendment and adjustment. And that's why we pray. Because honestly, it is not well at all for the industry. And we are always thinking of how to remain in employment. That is why some of us are so worried. And I felt that, no, this program is very, very important. We are not politicizing anything, but that is the reality. That is the facts. So we need to, if we can extend this the program, I think that will be very good for us to be able to, because a whole lot of things are happening. It's happening that is not known to the public. For instance, there is a fruit manufacturing company or fruit manufacturing companies in this country. Just about 2-3 months ago, Minister of Finance wrote to them that they should pay a levy of 2%. Now listen to that. 10% levy or tax
environmental
tax, that sort of thing. This industry is established here. They've given employment to people, and they are paying all these taxes and levies. As against those who import the finished products, who don't pay anything. So, does it mean that those who bring in the finished product do not, they are what? The plastic containers
also bringing in
are
plastic.
Not littered anywhere.
Yes.
It's only those who
produce here
that litter. So sometimes it's very difficult to understand some of these, arrangement or the policies of government. It's unfair. It means that you are gradually, phasing out industries, and that is going to affect jobs. And so, if you are creating jobs for Chinese people and others, I cannot understand. It's very, very difficult. I think that is where government must really pay. If they want to create jobs, then, because the importer of this finished product, how many workers do they employ?
I think before we get into it, I just wanted, and by the way, the Ministry of Finance or government in any shape or form, if they feel that there are incentives that are available and have not been mentioned, I'll be happy to give them the platform. But we're talking to industry here. And industry cannot recall in the last 30 or 40 years since the mantra of engine of growth started, any commendable or perceptible incentives that have come. So now let's go to the reverse. I want you to really tell Ghanaians the kind of issues that you are facing in terms of industry. You may think you know it all, but I think it's important for the people of Ghana to appreciate, what I call choking the engine of growth. And I want you to give examples, starting, let's say, with your industry, which is an intermediary industry, and then industry in general. And I'll ask Abraham to look at the job implications of these measures, of these failures. So let's start.
Yes. This is a very broad topic.
I want it to be broad.
If I want to go through the whole thing, we'll be here the whole night. So let me summarize.
We have 40 minutes
summarize very
to talk
quickly.
about it.
But before I go into my part, let me say very quickly before I get attacked, that it is not that the people in government do not understand. Charlie, they do understand. When you talk to them one-on-one, you get a good feedback, you get good conversation. But what happens? Nothing. The government in the last few years have started what they call the industrial sector policy.
That's right.
What has come of it? After that, they started the private sector development strategy #1.
It's not in the last few years. If I told you that Kwabena J and I sat down and wrote an industrial policy in 1990, and every year somebody just starts to rewrite a new policy.
Then they've gone to
the light
number 2.
Day. Yes.
I don't think even Ghanaians know about number 2. But what has come of it? There's supposed to be a council that meets with the president every quarter. I'm not sure that has happened. And if it has, what has happened as a result? Nothing. So all those are skirmishes as part of the bigger battleground, but not the war. The war is still being fought. We have not won it at all. And we're nowhere near winning the battle. They're winning the war because the battles have not been fought. The problem is that the private sector is getting noise from government. All these PSDC 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 will probably get to 10. And nothing's going to happen.
That's why I started off by asking what the incentives are beyond all those pious things.
Like I said in the beginning, I'm struggling to find incentives because we complained through the AGI. We, before the last budget, told the government that the level of taxes were strangling local industry. Because what they were doing was differentiating, like the fruit example, differentiating imports of finished and
Products.
semi-finished products from products in this country. Whereas we should be looking at improving this country. After all, when we say GDP, GDP means gross
Domestic product, yes.
Domestic.
Not gross imported
Not
product.
gross imported. Any gross imported doesn't affect our GDP. So all those imports are hurting us because all the World Bank and everybody else looks at a percentage of GDP, and the GDP is very small because we are importing. And therefore, we need to grow the domestic. And that is what we are looking for government to do, and they're not doing it. Now, like you just said, we find that we are being penalized.
Give me some examples. I mean, for example, let's start off with
You
this
work
stabilization.
in any area, and any investor goes into a business and does a business plan.
Yes, sir.
And says, this is what I'm going to meet, this is what I'm going to have to pay, this is what I'm going to have to get at the end of the day, so my investing public will know that they have a good investment to go into. Before you can say jack, even the district assemblies are increasing their taxes on you. You know what happened to Diamond Cement? They had to pay an equivalent of 198% increase in the taxes they were paying on their local ground. How do you square that in your business plan? How do you square that in your business plan? The investors will say, my friend, you're not serious. This country you are in, anything can change tomorrow. So we are driving investors away. Where I am now, I have a business and I'm trying to produce aluminium for this country. I import from Valco so that the whole chain goes smoothly in view of the extended aluminium sector supply chain project that we'll be following.
Yes.
And yet, I'm down to 18%
Of the market.
Because Chinese products are flooding this market. And the Chinese products coming into this market are coming not because they are more efficient than me. In fact, I have statistics in my company, I wish I had brought it here, to show that in certain sectors of our business, we are better off than the Chinese. We are more efficient than they are. Yet they come here cheaper because their government gives them subsidies to make their products arriving here cheaper.
Good.
They actually give them on top of that an export rebate to make it cheaper in this country. Because they realize that there are certain sectors of the economies that must be helped to grow because they are vital to them, even if not economically, at least to create
jobs.
Create jobs and to let the world know that they too
are there.
They
Day, as they say.
They day.
Okay, Abraham, you have a slew of some of the frightening numbers. You see, unfortunately, out of the structural adjustment prescription, the budgeting of this country works on this way. They define a revenue requirement to pay off civil servants and all of that stuff. And they say, how do we find the money to plug it? It's not a question of how do we incentivize people to generate more money. They say, this is a revenue we must find. So who is the easiest person to get it from? That, unfortunately, is the way it works. But you have a slew of numbers which I think we need to share with people about the kind of taxes and things which are proving to be a disincentive to the private sector. You talked about your 2% and your...
Yeah, 2% and then the 10% aside the corporate taxes and, you know, those who, the local industries employ and pay social security, national health insurance, a whole lot of them. I think the support that the local industries give to the state is such that the state should reciprocate by, supporting them.
Recently, for example, you were a little, shall we say, had a little difficulty or differences with your fellow comrades on the issue of the tariff. And I think it's important to explain why you felt that maybe the support should have gone to the productive sector.
Yeah, you see, we disagreed with our friends because strike action, if you are targeting government, then I think they were misdirecting their, frustrations, something like that. Because, for instance, Aluwex, look at the problems that my senior brother has enumerated. So if the workers decide not to go to work, are you punishing Aluwex or you are punishing the state? That's the problem that we had. 2, ECG, the state itself is not directly involved in the determination of these tariffs. VRA, ECG, Gridco, and some other private ones, they are producing this.
Sogli and Netco and all those, yes.
And I read something. VRA requested for 148% increase on the tariff. ECG requested for 214%. It was PUIC that reduced these demands. VRA, they were giving 36%. It's against the 148. Then ECG was giving 50.6% or so against the 214% that they were asking for. So you can see that government was not directly involved. If anything, then it is these service providers. So have we found out to know why they made such fantastic demands? Is it about mismanagement? Is it about wastages that they want the ordinary consumer to bear? So if you target government, because government can say, okay, we are reducing this thing to such level that everybody can. But is that going to help? Government have they got the money? Even this 25%. I'm only praying that 400
million.
I'm only praying that they even get money. Otherwise, the doomsday will come again. Because if the facility providers are not financially resourced, they can't produce. They cannot produce. That's why that problem.
It's a very timely time for you to, your industry depends an incredible lot on power.
Power, yes.
And how has even the so-called reduced increase, how has it impacted on your overall cost of production and the competitiveness?
Well, we are extremely worried.
Yeah.
We are extremely worried. Because there are different ways of looking at this. If you look at it from the cost burden to us, then of course we are happy that it has been reduced. But knowing the industry we are in and knowing who
but you are still bearing a 50% increase.
You are still bearing, but we're knowing the supplying industry to us, we are worried that this decline, this depreciation of the tariff is going to give us problems into the future. I have written a paper some 2 weeks ago from my knowledge of that industry, having been a director of ECG many years ago, twice actually.
Yes.
And I know that the requirement from the industry is justified. It has got to the level of the 148% that you're asking for, not because it is a today matter. It is a cumulative effect
decisions.
Of all the postponements we've had from year to year. If at the time they wanted 20%, we gave them 20%, we would not have the cumulative effect. Yeah. But even at that time, government said, take 10%. Mm-hmm. When you take 10%, you cut the tariff requirement down, you postpone certain incentive requirements that they were intending to do. And what happens is that you postpone the agony to tomorrow. And the agony does not become just 10%, but over time, things get weaker, they deteriorate, and it multiplies. Exactly. It becomes bigger. And therefore, we now have to stop this thing of cutting down, because every time the next round comes, it's going to be bigger. We got 148%. PRC, let us hope they did their job well. And they said, we will give so much. Government has now gone and reduced it. The next one...
Isn't that an incentive for industry?
It is an incentive for industry if you look short term.
Okay.
Because today, my bill will be shorter. It's smaller. Today. But I know tomorrow, I will pay, because not only the bill that I'm going to pay, it is a consequence of not paying the full tariff today and the doomsday that I'll be getting until the new tariff comes up. That is more expensive.
Give us some relative terms. Because we just come out of almost a year of doomsday. If you're running generators or whatever, what's the relative cost?
In fact, my business is so big that I cannot run generators.
So you have to
so
stop.
I actually go off.
You stop.
I actually go off. Luckily, I don't get my power from ECG.
No.
I get my power from VRA.
That's right.
Who, luckily, are able to tell me very quickly, or are supposed to tell me very quickly if they're going to go off. But they do go off. Sometimes they don't tell us. Now, when they do go off without telling us, we have equipment that should not go off because we run a furnace.
Yeah, because of the...
We run furnaces after 3 furnaces with equipment that should not go off. When it goes off, it costs us millions of dollars just to stop. Plus, we run fuel furnaces.
Oh, yes.
When you stop, the fuel does not stop by itself because the generator is the furnace is hot. And you will run the fuel with no production, which is very expensive. Then you realize that it's doomsday, so you stop. Unfortunately, you've got metal that gets clogged.
Yes.
That's expensive.
Yeah.
You've got to clear it out. The furnace cools down. They tell you we're going to start again in tomorrow or the day after. You can start again. It takes 3 days of just burning fuel to heat up to where we need to go to start up again.
How many people do you employ?
Of dollars.
How many people do you employ?
We, as ourselves, employ around 260, 100 people at any time. But we never reckon our business as ourselves because we're intermediate. We're between Valco and all the people downstream who take our product. And there are thousands and thousands of people below us waiting for my product because they have to use the sheet to make roofing sheets. All the Ghanaians, Metalex, all those people, they take my sheets to make roofing sheets. Domod and Co., they're waiting for the circles to make the interesting, the pots and pans. And when we shut down, then they also
out of business.
Out of business.
How many, if you were to be able to go back to the levels of proportion that you had before, how many people would you be employing? Assuming you could get to...
Oh, right now, Charlie, to be honest with you, we are down to about 18% market share.
I used to be where? 100?
At one time, before the Chinese came, we were solely in charge, which maybe was not so good because we are almost monopolistic. But we are a young country. This country is not in a state where we should be competing with First World. We are still running the race. We are preparing to run the race. We are not First World. So we need that kind of help to make sure that we can run and get to that level before we start competing in the First World. And the First World is already here.
Abraham, I mean, how many... Look, he's raised this issue where probably he's gone from 100 to 18%. That has serious implications for jobs. Yeah. And looking at what has happened over the years, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, or in the last, let's say, to be fair, 10 years, what have been the implications on jobs for all these slew of taxes that government is putting on industry? I mean, you obviously are looking at the effect on employment. Have you done any analysis to see the jobs that have been lost and what could have been,
Yeah, see, apart from the taxes, the unfair competition.
No, I'm talking about that. Do you have any numbers on jobs that have been lost?
Yeah, I can. If not GIHOC 16 subsidiaries, those ones gone already.
What will be the quantum of numbers? How many jobs will be involved?
Oh, I cannot be very sure about it, but textiles alone.
Yes.
Textiles alone. In the 70s, I was employed in the industry 1971. And we used to be 25,000 nationwide. As I speak now, we are less than 3,000.
The textile industries?
Only textiles industry. That one I can speak on authority because work there. The others, I can't count them.
We are looking at, in terms of the energy-intensive industries, the mines are beginning to lay people off because of...
They have started already, and more are going to go. If the world, the price of gold does not appreciate.
Well, and also the fact that the tariff, utility prices are also going up.
And mines depend on generators to work? It's not possible. Like the MD is saying, it will not work. You see, so the interventions of governments, we all appreciate the economic challenges that they are facing, though. But you see, I see the budget statement as some academic exercise. They do very nice research, come out with these things. But its application or implementation becomes a serious problem. Because this morning, because of this invitation, I went through budget statement from 1990 up to today, 2013. And if you read...
Tell me some of the things you found. The difference between the plan and the reality. Tell me some of it.
I'm very confused, but I think we don't have enough time.
Oh, we have time. If I think I think we need to get some harsh numbers so that people can understand what's going on.
You see, Ministry of Trade and Industry, in line with the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda and the Sector Medium-Term Plan, the Ministry pursued programs under the second phase of the Private Sector Development Strategy, PSDS 2, and the Industrial Sector Support Program, ISSP, which are intended to help create jobs, increase levels of income, enhance the human resource capacities of business people, and improve the overall national development. That's something that I read. And job creation to Mr. Speaker, the governance structure for PSDS2 has been set up. The PSDS2 board also acts as trustees for the Private Sector Development Fund, which has been set up. Look, let me...
I think we've all seen these things.
Yes. So these things are written, and you come to a place, it talks about helping the private sector to develop, create jobs, to employ. So I said, so are we creating more jobs, or we are throwing out the few that we even have? That's why I say that this.
So these are the prior statements which are refused all budgets from 1990.
Yes, up to now. This one is current.
Yes.
2013. 2013. You as we go on, I'll find where I saw the support they will give to the private sector to create, to employ more. So I don't know where this employment, whether it's...
So you can't find it?
No.
Beyond the budget statement?
No, I can't see all these things. So they are very nice things. Very nice.
The 1.3 million jobs that were created, it didn't affect the private sector.
Maybe Jida.
At the risk of being political.
Don't be political. I want to get two specific answers out of the two of you. The impact of the stabilization. There's a lot of measures were announced, which really were essentially squeezing industry. Can you...
I've seen it. Look, the ministry will continue the implementation of the Private Sector Development Strategy Phase 2, PSDS 2, to widen economic opportunities for the transformation of the Ghanaian economy and to develop a thriving private sector that creates jobs and enhances livelihoods for all.
Excellent.
But nothing has happened.
This is the problem. This is a very nice document. That's why I'm saying that it's an academic exercise, well researched, and you've done this beautiful thing, but we're not working with it. I don't know why.
You see, since the onset of computers, they can lift it every year and put it there.
And so nothing.
But let's talk about, I want to go into talking about what your expectations are, which will bring this in.
Yes.
But let's look at those measures that were announced. Stabilization, there's all those levies at the port, and the kind of things that I think industry is beginning to complain about bitterly.
Well, industry has complained many years over the infrastructure that we face, that we have to work with, the ports being one. The ports have been very difficult because, unfortunately, a lot of the industry in Ghana relies on imports for raw material.
Yes, sir.
So things coming in give us a lot of trouble if it's not smooth. And it has never been smooth. The transformation has not worked. The intention of government was good, but they failed to realize that the problem was more with the integrity of the port than the administrative things around it.
The president was there yesterday announcing review of port charges, etc. That somebody should look at it.
Have you been on the beach road in the last few weeks?
No,
If
sir.
you drive on the beach road, just turn your eye out into the sea.
Yeah, all those.
And see all the ships lining up there, just sitting there. They're not sitting there because they want to sit there. They're not sitting there, they're sitting there because whatever we're doing here is not working. I have been bringing things in for trying to expand my business, machinery that's supposed to come in, which should have arrived in my factory in 7 days, and the ship is sitting out there. 3 weeks later, it is still sitting out there. So it doesn't matter whether we have streamlined the system in
On
the
paper.
port. If the goods have
Don't
not
come.
arrived at the port, that doesn't matter.
And then when they do arrive, you pay a lot of
And
taxes.
then when it arrives, unfortunately for private sector, there are so many pre-production taxes that you have to pay.
Take us through some of them.
You get, first of all, as for import duty,
You see,
we all know.
I want you to educate us. You know all the things. So you educate us.
When the goods arrive,
Yes.
of course, you have to clear them.
Yeah.
The amount of charges that you have to face, both official and unofficial,
Facilitation fees.
really makes, and if you decide that you're not going to pay the second one, then it will be 6 months. But sometimes you have to put your foot down because some of the requirements are so high that it doesn't make sense to try and put that into your production cost. You can't recover it. So you have to put your foot down and go along to what the way that ought to go. You have a lot of pre-production clearance charges. You have to pay VAT, which has gone up now. You have to pay NHIL charges,
Standard board charge.
standard board charges,
FDA charges.
There are all those charges
ECOWAS.
before you even started. Before you even started. Then you have to produce. A lot of us produce and hopefully we can export some of our products. Then you export the product through, again, difficulty going through the port. Sometimes we have goods sitting in the port for 3 weeks, 4 weeks before it leaves. So you've exported. There's a VAT refund, there's an export rebate you're supposed to get, and you sit and wait.
And never comes.
In the meantime, because you've paid the pre-production taxes, you are out of pocket.
Cash flow is dead.
You can't go to do the next one because your cash flow is gone. Unless you go and borrow
From the bank.
from the bank.
At 30%.
And you know that the interest rate
By the
is
time
for-
you added the charges, it's 30%.
by the time you finish, you ask yourself, why on earth am I doing what I'm doing? Because you have to pay your workers. As for the workers, they have to eat.
Yes.
You can't tell them that you haven't got the VAT refund or you haven't got the duty drawback back. You have to pay them. So the little money you could have used to run the business, you use to pay charges that are one-off, like salaries. Then you sit because you can't invest.
And then after that, you pay stabilization. Let's move on and see what we are expecting. But I think you've done some pretty useful research.
Yes.
And I want us to take us through it.
I have some.
And then we will anticipate how many of those phrases will come up again on Tuesday.
Yes.
So let's start.
Yeah. The item 354. The ministry will continue to implement the industrial sector support program with particular focus on value addition, availability of industrial raw materials, improvement in technology and innovation, and development of strategic sectors, an industrial development fund to facilitate rapid development of Ghana's industrial sector is also to be established.
This is last year's budget.
Yes, this year's budget.
This year, 2013.
I think we'll be asking the Ministry of Finance to look at it. So and the ones you went from previous years, what has happened?
Well, the previous years,
the same thing.
The same thing. You see, the same thing. It keeps, being recurrent and
regurgitated.
Yes, so it's not a new thing. But I think that AGI must also sit up. I think that individual industries do not have the capacity to, engage government on some of these issues. Why do we have AGI? AGI is like a union, the union that I represent. Employees Association, they're also there. Their members are under severe pressure. Their members are distressed. Their members they are desperate. They need help. What are they doing?
You see, in doing my research, I came across the president launching a private sector advisory council. And it's made up of all the heads of the major private sector bodies, AGI, PEF, etc. And I asked myself the question, has that council met since it was inaugurated? I don't know. What do you think we need to do beyond these pious phrases which nobody is... Actually, let me ask you a very direct question. You as industry, you read these things. Do you actually go back and check what happened and find out the reality behind these things as industry? Because reading this thing, what I hear is a lot of nice words.
Very nice.
No, as an engineer, I'm trying to look at, how many jobs were created, how many cities were put into this fund, how many... Does industry actually, or has industry just given up on government?
I think I prefer the last few words you have said.
Industry has given up on
because the policies you've just outlined...
And by the way, we're not talking NDC government. We are talking about all governments of Ghana which have spotted private sector being the engine of growth.
Remember that the objective of all these policy initiatives is the private sector.
That's right.
We do not need to go and find out what is happening. We should feel it. Charlie, we should know that all of a sudden we can see things happening. So if nothing is happening, there's no need to go and find out what is happening.
But you feel the taxes.
We feel the taxes.
And you feel the congestions.
And we feel the congestion. And we feel the difficulty we have trying to sell the little we've got because the influx of foreign goods is far cheaper than ours. We feel that. But we don't feel anything else in terms of the alleviation that we expect.
You've worked for a multinational company for many years of your life. What kind of incentives, for example, did your company have elsewhere that you think may help here in terms of and I noticed that your former company has downsized most of its manufacturing and moved it elsewhere. What kind of incentive do you think government needs to give to the private sector to really realize this value-added manufacturing thing?
You see, I mean, you're right. I work for Unilever.
Yeah.
And I worked in South Africa. I worked of course, in Ghana, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Uganda. And because I was customer director for Africa, I worked all around Africa. The view of a multinational company is a base or a market where it can make sufficient revenue to please its investors, the shareholders. The reason why they've downsized here is that the costs are too much. The costs are killing them. And when they do that, then they rationalize all around the world to see where is best to place certain productive capacities. So Unilever has been slowly moving out of this country. Unilever is not the only one.
No.
PZ has closed down a lot of its business.
That's right. Even the tobacco people moved out.
That is because the conditions on the ground make it difficult for them to stay. What I expect government to do is to recognize that we have a problem. These people are moving. What can we do to make them think that this is a different place, and this is a place where they can have good business, and a place where they should stay? Because better Ghana means more jobs. Yeah. What should we do to retain the jobs in this country rather than just watch them go away?
So what do you want? It may be late, but I think that we should put that a marker. What are the specific things you want to see government now and governments of succeeding generations to do to make real?
The first thing the government has to do, not all these highfalutin research, but to understand that we need to grow Ghana. After all, we need to grow our economy so that we can feed the growing population and the teeming, increasing workforce. The universities are spewing out more and more and more graduates every year. Where do they go? That is a big problem. So the government must understand that.
And they cannot all join the public sector.
They can't. So the government understand that they have to go somewhere. So we have to understand what are the basic industries, the main industries that, not all industries, but the main industries that we need to support strongly to be able to absorb all these people. And give them support and incentives, tax breaks, so that they can improve. Even, for example, anybody, I think AJ has come out before, anybody employs more than 1,000 people every year to get a certain tax break. Because we need people to get jobs. If they don't have jobs, then it becomes social problems. So government must understand, first of all, what industries they need to support to grow this country. Then the second thing is to say that, what do we need to do in terms of what are the incentives, what are the structures we need to put in place?
What are some of them, you think, the incentives?
I've said one about giving
the
tax break for... Second
giving
thing is
cheaper tariffs than domestic, for example.
If they decide to use aluminium as a prime industry that we need because of the multiply effect, for us we are intermediate, but the number of people that are employed below us, if we die, the number of people who will lose jobs because of us.
How is that the Valco sort of lower tariff? Is that an incentive, making Valco pay below the cost of supply?
It is an incentive in a way, because we need to keep a vital industry, the Valco, which you may say is a sunk cost, but because we have sunk so much investment in there, we should not see it go to waste. But Valco paying lower tariffs, in fact, is not unusual. We have done research, and we did that in the research we used for the paper we did to Cabinet for Valco coming back. That showed that all around the world, smelters like Valco get the lowest tariff, especially from hydro, because they know that they are not profit centers. Mm-hmm. They are production centers who then create the multiplier effect for other centers to grow.
The synergistic industries.
It is. Yes. They should not be looked at as a center that must make money. We must invest in them because there will be more jobs because they are there.
From your perspective, Abraham, apart from seeing a repetition of these fine words, what do you hope that the budget will do for us on Tuesday? In terms of creating jobs, which is really, or even sustaining the jobs that are already there.
Yeah, you see, the technical working committee that was put in place by government after the announcement of this tariff increase. I read somewhere, unfortunately I didn't bring it, and it considered the rates for the industry. I think their recommendation was that the industries should be made to pay lower
tariffs.
In fact, I didn't bring it. I'm not very sure about the actual percentage increase that they recommended. But then, I think that what government has to do, even Nigeria here, government gives subsidies to manufacturing industries, especially when their products are meant for export. You see, and this is what we have to. So, look, the theme for this year's budget was sustaining confidence in the future of the Ghanaian economy. It's a very nice thing. So, next month ends the year. So, what have we achieved? See, that is what we must always, look back and see whether what we put in place has really brought any positive result. And I think that as a worker, we will always partner
in
our employers. And we will appeal to the AGI, their union, that is AGI, and then employers to also, I don't know, maybe they have some other means of, raising money to run it. Otherwise, if it is, they depend on dues paid by industry, then they should also, demonstrate against them by withholding their dues.
What has been the impact of, how many members have you lost this year? Can you think of it?
No, this yeif
simply because they were laid off, so they can't.
Yeah, so we cannot even count them. Maybe next time, if you want that figure, I'll be able to try to bring me back next time, so that
I'll bring you back next time. But so give me your final word, because we are coming to the end of the discussion.
My final
I still want you to tell me what you're expecting from Honorable Tepe on Tuesday, apart from those fine words.
Industry, because already they have started the increases already. So I don't know whether they're going to add more to it, or I don't know what they're going to do. But we think that if they really want industry to grow, employ people, because the focus of government is creation of jobs. And so if they want to create jobs and not to destroy jobs, then of course they should be mindful of the negative effect of their policies.
Last word.
I agree with him, but I'll put it a slightly different way.
Yeah.
The problem the Minister of Finance has is a structural one. We have excess expenditure. Whether it's corruption or not is another matter. But we have excess expenditure. One thing we can do is reduce the expenditure. I'll leave that to him. But we should also look at increasing the revenue. Because that will balance.
But not through taxes, taxing industry out of existence.
Taxes, but reasonable taxes. Because we are looking at the traditional ways of getting revenue, and they are failing us. Gold is going down. Cocoa is going down. The oil we expected to get is not coming. It's not getting to the level we expected. And therefore, what is left?
Industry to grow.
Industry to grow. But if you want industry to go, it's like a tree. You can't pluck the fruit unless you've actually grown the tree. And they're not growing the tree.
Nice way to bring it to an end. Thank you very much, Abraham. Thank you, right, Bosso. You've heard it. On Tuesday, the Honorable Tekbe will give the 2014 budget. He's given a taste of what we should expect with the announcement of VAT a few days before the budget is read. Let me also give you another little secret. Normally we have our budgets on Thursdays. This one is being held on a Tuesday. Why? Because the Black Stars are playing. Why? I think it's going to be so bad, they want you to focus on the football and not on the bad news. The industry of Ghana, the fortunes of Ghana, will depend on our turning our raw materials through value-added and industrial production and services. The engine of growth is being choked instead of being fueled to propel us to greater economic development. Thank you for being with us. It's a subject that we shall return to, because if Ghana is going to develop, it will not come from importing second-hand clothes. It will come from a private sector, vibrant, vigorous, creating jobs and making us all well and happy. Good night.